King begins this chapter by showing how the virtue of carefulness connects with the virtue of curiosity we covered in the previous chapter. On page 58, he writes of carefulness, this virtue repels us from falsehood and unreasonable belief. It supplies motivation to avoid these intellectual evils and helps us succeed in doing so. There are three important things I see in this claim. First, like curiosity, carefulness is a virtue that motivates us. It moves us to action and to particular kinds of action. Second, as King notes, it is the mere image of curiosity insofar as it pushes us away from falsehood and unreasonable belief, just as curiosity draws us toward truth and accurate reasoning. Third, and maybe controversially, there is such a thing as intellectual evil. Have you given thought to that possibility before? I'm not sure I have before reading this book. Let's take it a little deeper before moving on. Let's consider a brief taxonomy of states regarding truth value. A belief or claim can be true. By true, we mean something like corresponds to reality, coheres with other things we take to be true, or fits well with the way life works. These brief descriptions match up in order with the correspondence theory of truth, the coherence theory of truth, and the pragmatic theory of truth. Other evaluative terms we might use for beliefs and claims that are in the same semantic ballpark as true are words like correct, right, accurate. Not every belief or claim is true. Some forms of evaluation for beliefs and claims that fall short of truth include terms like false, lie, error. The second of these terms, lie, can be pejorative. When we say someone's belief or claim is a lie, we're not just making a claim about their belief or claim. We're making a claim, and a negative claim at that, about their character. Someone who lies has a degree of intentionality lacking in those whose beliefs or claims are merely false or erroneous. I can be wrong about many things without lying about any of them. What counts is what King calls an intellectual evil. Do these require a similar level of intentionality to what we see in lies? Under what conditions is it helpful to use the strong language of intellectual evil rather than something softer like intellectual failure? Surely in our quest to find truth and to avoid falsehood, we want to avoid more than just lies, more than just the errors that come our way out of perverse intentionality. What advantages and disadvantages do you see in using this strong language of evil here? Take a look at the examples King provides on pages 59 and 60. After taking time to think through them, compare your responses to the answers in the footnotes. How did you do? Each of these examples features a different fallacy that's common to our thinking. The first is the conjunction fallacy. This is the idea that a combination of states or conditions is more probable than a single state or condition. In this case, the fallacy would be to take the information in the example and suppose it more likely that Linda was a bank teller and a feminist. Look at the Venn diagram on page 60 that illustrates this example. Does it help you see why this is a fallacy? The second fallacy is covered on pages 61 through 63. King calls it the base rate fallacy. Notice again that King claims this fallacy is really common. Working from the example he provides, can you think of an example from your own experience where this fallacy came into play? The third fallacy is what he calls unrepresentative evidence. We give much weight to our experience, even if in the whole scheme of things, our experience is only of a very small bit of possible evidence. Probability thinking doesn't seem to come very naturally to us. I remember when I was working on my master's degree, and one of my teachers was telling us about an archaeological excavation of an ancient Egyptian cemetery. The burials were from the very late or first or early 2nd century. He told us that the very first grave they excavated showed evidence of being a burial of a Christian. He reasoned from this that if there were 400 graves in the cemetery, the very first grave excavated was a Christian grave, then surely there must have been many Christians buried there, and therefore many Christians in that part of Egypt at that time. But consider the sample size. How many graves had they excavated? One. What does a sample of one tell us? Not much. In this case, it told us there was at least one Christian burial in that cemetery. It could be that this grave was the only Christian buried there. A small sample size, in this case, a sample of one, tells us practically nothing. There can be undesired consequences when we are careless in our reasoning and pursuit of knowledge. On pages 64 through 66, King gives us some examples of the cost of careless epistemic practices. Sometimes the cost is just in terms of money. Sometimes it's lost opportunity. Sometimes the cost is someone's health or life. Our awareness of the possibility of negative consequences can spur us on to greater care. We might also think here of a way that a lack of care can produce intellectual evil. We consider the consequences of our acts of knowing and claiming to know, believing and reasoning. We can imagine the costs of error to ourselves and to others. Ignoring these possible catastrophic failures out of hubris or laziness can implicate us in evil. King's book is an exercise in what's called virtue epistemology. As we've seen in previous chapters, he develops ideas about intellectual virtues from Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle generally finds a virtue as a mean, a sort of midpoint between places of excess and deficiency. When we're dealing with carefulness, King calls the deficiency carelessness and the excess scrupulosity. It might be that you're ready to recognize the former as a vice than the latter. You've seen examples of the cost of carelessness and know how harmful it can be. But why would scrupulosity be a problem? Consider the examples King provides on page 67. In the one case, he imagines a person proofing an email 35 times. Proofing our communications and whatever modality we're sending them is a good idea. That helps us avoid careless errors. But doing it 35 times? What about the other examples? The PhD student in history working on her dissertation. When you're writing something that amounts to a 200 to 300 page book, there are plenty of occasions for error. The process for writing mine was to send the first completed copy, which was itself the result of my own proofing with my wife's help, to my advisor. I was discouraged when she sent it back to me full of red ink. I expected plenty of advice on how to structure and argue my case. I hadn't expected to have so many typos and simple errors I missed pointed out to me. After making all those corrections, I sent it off to my second institutional reader. And behold, there were still many errors to be found. I made all those corrections and then sent off the revised version to my external reader. Perhaps you can guess what he found. Still more errors that I had missed. Don't think errors are only a problem for students. We all make them. I've reviewed books that have a variety of errors in them. Do you notice what the student's scrupulosity leads her to do? She fears making errors so much, she never finishes, never submits her work. Her scrupulosity has paralyzed her with doubt. There's a cost to too much carefulness. King moves to another dimension of scrupulosity, skepticism. Skepticism has its place. It can be a useful tool in our toolbox. When skepticism controls us, however, we run into two problems. First, we miss the usefulness of probabilistic reasoning. Some things are more likely than others. When the odds of a particular possibility are strong enough, it can be rational to set aside our doubts. Second, many times in life, we can't afford to dither. Our involvement in the world requires us to make decisions and act when we lack all the information and certainty we might like to have. We have to act knowing we might be wrong. As with the virtue of curiosity, there are multiple considerations when we want carefulness to be done rightly. King uses his target metaphor again. The first thing our carefulness needs to come out right is the right objects. He gives us three things to consider when it comes to the right object. First, he writes, first, some topics seem to welcome precision, while others stubbornly resist it. Some topics allow for more precision than others. It's our job to know the difference. This is where your particular field of study comes into play. As you delve into your major field, you are not only learning many facts, figures, methods, and developing skills, you are being inculcated into a discipline of inquiry and practice, a part of which is learning the types of judgments necessary to do well in that discipline. You learn how reasoning works, not merely in general, but specifically within the bounds and limitations of your discipline. Whether your discipline is medicine, philosophy, business, or even plumbing, learning these things takes time. King's second consideration regarding the object of our carefulness is that some objects of our study demand more precision. Being wrong in precise practical sciences, say those involving providing anesthesia to a heart patient in surgery, building a bridge, or guiding a spacecraft to its destination, demand great care and accuracy. In each of these, there is a high cost to error and often no opportunity for a do-over. The third consideration is one of importance. In some cases, precision is absolutely important, while in others, it is relatively important, depending on our situation and context. Here are some guidelines that he offers on pages 72 and 73. He says, when our beliefs about a topic X have logical implications for a large number of other beliefs, we should consider X carefully. Our beliefs about what's real, what can be known, and what it is to live well fit into this category. He also adds, other things being equal, topics central to human flourishing tend to deserve more care than those that are peripheral. Inquiries into medicine, the nature of justice, the ethics of war, the education of children, and the distribution of wealth will tend to deserve greater care than inquiries into celebrity fashion trends. He also adds, topics central to our vocation will tend to deserve careful thought. An auto mechanic will need to exercise care in engine diagnosis, a doctor in medical diagnosis, and so on. Last of all, he adds, topics about which we form policies that affect others will tend to deserve careful thought. For example, to vote responsibly, we must ensure that we are informed on the relevant issues and have arrived at our views by assessing relevant evidence carefully. We also consider whether our level of carefulness is appropriate to the occasion. We are constantly confronted with things and situations that demand our attention and consideration. We have to weigh the relative importance and urgency of each of these. As finite beings, we cannot give the same amount of care to everything that comes our way. One important consideration King offers is that we consider the propensity for fallibility. If we are faced with a situation in which error is more likely, it behooves us to give greater attention and care to our acts of knowing, believing, and reasoning. The pages that follow, King deals with the last two elements related to his target image, having the right method and the right motivation. These are also important factors to consider and worthy of your attention. It's especially important for you to become aware of your epistemic practices, to identify where you have been most prone to error. The better the methods you have ready to hand to form and evaluate the beliefs you hold, the claims you make, the better off you'll be.